Governor Pritzker, thank you so much for joining us today, for sitting down with us. Like you said, I think you said 10 days until Election Day.
That's right.
How's the campaign trail treating you on the home stretch here?
It's great. We're doing, 7, 8 events a day, and honestly, it's been terrific. Great reaction all over the state. Here in Springfield today, glad to spend some time with you, and I'll be with some of the great labor union members and supporting Nikki Budzinski, who's running for Congress, and State Senator Doris Turner for re-election. So really excited about the day.
You've poured a lot of money into your own race, obviously, you've been spreading that among other candidates in the Democratic Party as well. The race for governor here in Illinois is the most, if not the most, one of the most expensive races so far when you tally in some of the money going to the people who play by the rules pack as well on the other side. But I wonder, do you feel like that's good for politics to see the tab getting run up so much when you have also Richard Uihlein and the billionaires really controlling the money flow on both sides of the party?
Look, Illinois is worth it. Let's start with that. But there's been more than $100 million spent against me. It is hard to compete unless you try to at least raise or have a campaign that can compete with that, and so I have. And I'm pleased with how we've done against that kind of onslaught. Been nonstop attacks from the other side. But I've been running on my record, and it's a positive record of getting things done for people across the state of Illinois, especially here in central Illinois, investing in infrastructure, creating jobs, lifting up the minimum wage, protecting a woman's right to choose. There's an awful lot we've gotten done over the last 4 years, and that's really what I've been running on.
Those nonstop attacks you mentioned that have been coming in from the Republican side have also been focused on parts of your record as well. Obviously, most recently, crime and the Safety Act. And there's been some misinformation, some claims made about the act that weren't true, but you also are at the table with state's attorneys across the state, the State's Attorneys Association, with those concerns, with valid concerns about this legislation. And I wonder, when you're on the campaign trail, when you're trying to balance the messaging of this is a good thing, there's some changes to be made, but then you have the other side saying, this is the worst, this is a purge law in the state. How do you balance that kind of messaging while you're on the campaign trail, while also trying to do the job and making changes to that legislation?
It's very hard to fight disinformation, and that's what that is. The fact is that the Safety Act is part of a broader effort to make our neighborhoods safer, to bring crime down across the state of Illinois. I think we all know that we've seen crime rise across the nation during COVID, and I take that very seriously. And I've been focused on increasing the number of state police, and I've done that during my term. By the way, my opponent, Darren Bailey, opposed that. I've provided money for state-of-the-art crime labs we've built and eliminated the rape kit backlog in the state that existed under the prior Republican governor. Darren Bailey voted against that. We need the tools and technology for our police so that they can solve crimes quickly. Once again, we provided that in my budget, including a gang crime witness protection program. Darren Bailey voted against all of that. So when we talk about the Safety Act, Darren Bailey once again wants to repeal the Safety Act, but then he says he can't repeal reproductive rights. And as we know, that just means either he doesn't understand the legislative process or he's lying about his positions. Look, I think that we need to keep the Safety Act and make sure that the Republicans can't effectuate their disinformation. Nobody's letting anybody out of jail on January 1 unless a Republican state's attorney or a Republican judge decides to do that, because it's not in the law that people will be let out of jail. The fact is that we have a system now, before we ever get to no cash bail, we have a system now where murderers and rapists and domestic abusers can buy their way out of jail. That's ridiculous. Those people ought to be kept in jail. That's what the Safety Act does.
Well, if there's the opportunity for somebody to effectuate some of that misinformation you're claiming, doesn't that prove that there's some problems with the law as it's written right now?
But again, it's not the law that's written as it's written right now. It's that the people who will enforce the law, the Republican state's attorneys, let's say, will decide that, in order to prove themselves right, they're going to actually let people out of jail. Let's not let them do that. Let's amend the law so that they can't do that. That's something that they're doing for their own political benefit. And it does not benefit the people of Illinois. It does not benefit the families or neighborhoods across the state of Illinois. Let's keep them from doing it. We can pass an amendment to keep them from doing it.
There are some state's attorneys that are part of the State's Attorneys Association, part of the negotiations ongoing right now that talk about some of the, there's parts of the Safety Act that are too vague, there's parts of it that are too restricting, and they point to that as the reasons why these conversations are happening.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm in favor of those conversations. I know people who are at the table, and of course the governor's office is monitoring all of that. They're working with the legislature. Look, I think there are always tweaks that can be made to a law. You know as well as I do that thousands of amendments are made to existing laws every year. Changes are made because we always want to improve existing laws on the books, and sometimes they need improvement. Let's do it here, and let's make sure people are at the table. They were at the table when we passed the Safety Act. They just didn't like some provisions that got passed. You're at the table, you don't always get what you want. Now they want to come back and have another negotiation about aspects of the act. I think that's reasonable. Let's keep talking about it, and let's get something done.
I want to shift now. Some of the other attacks you've been seeing on the campaign trail have had to do with some of the state agencies. Obviously, DCFS at the forefront. That has been an embattled agency for years
decades,
now.
Yeah.
But then we've also we had the IDES during COVID. A lot of the problems with other agencies were caused because of COVID. But as we come out of them, what's the next step to making sure agencies like IDES, DCFS, IDOC, all these continue to, or it will improve and get out of some of the struggles that they've been seeing over the past few years?
Well, we've made those improvements at IDES. In fact, I'm very proud of the way that the agency has overcome the challenges. Remember what they had dumped on them, literally 1 million people applying for benefits, unemployment benefits, really all at once. That's not something that anybody anticipated when they created the systems that were built, by the way, during the Great Recession, when we had a lot of people 10 years ago applying for unemployment benefits. But this was almost 8 times the number of people who applied back then for benefits coming onto the system. So we've now overcome that challenge. We have the lowest number of people getting unemployment claims, applying for unemployment claims that we've ever had in the state of Illinois. That's partly because we've created so many jobs. Everybody's gone back to work. In fact, we need more people to enter the labor market because we have so many available jobs in the state. So IDES is actually in a much better position than it was, and I'm pleased with the work that we did. Now, DCFS for decades has been underfunded and understaffed, and governors were replacing the heads of the agency over and over. We had 13 directors over 12 years at DCFS. That doesn't help fix anything. It's just a way of scapegoating somebody at the agency to blame them for something that's going wrong. When I took over, I made sure that we actually focused on what needed to be fixed. So I brought in the experts, University of Chicago, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and they did a study of what is it that we need to do to improve the way DCFS operates and keep our most vulnerable children safe. And so they gave us a handbook, essentially, of these are the things that need to be fixed. And we've gone about doing that and are succeeding. The hotline, just as one example. 50% of the calls that were coming into the hotline before I became governor weren't getting answered. Imagine that. This is people reporting neglect and abuse, those calls not getting answered. Now, 99.5% of all the calls that come in get answered right away. That's a very important improvement. It allows us then to make sure we put an investigator on it and get on top of a bad situation. Another is we've aggressively added personnel to the agency as fast as we can. Now we have a labor shortage across the state and across the country, in fact, but we're still hiring as much as we possibly can. And then finally, we've retrained everybody at the agency from top to bottom. Some people had been there for 15 years or 20 years and had not been trained maybe ever. And we instead said, look, from the top of the agency to the bottom of the agency, every single person needs to get retrained for the job that we have. So those are some of the big improvements that have occurred. These are our most vulnerable children. There are a lot of challenges. Their parents often have mental health issues, substance abuse treatment issues. They go into treatment and come out, and sometimes they unfortunately relapse. And even though they're in a good condition when they come out and they have the ability to take care of their kids, they do, and then they relapse and another problem can arise. So sometimes you see terrible, tragic circumstances occur. But the agency is much better than it was before. And if you look at the cases that go before judges, as we're trying to deal with the challenges that the agency's had for years and overcome the consent decrees, the judges are actually acknowledging that there have been big improvements at DCFS.
When you talk about you mentioned the labor shortage as a reason why hiring for DCFS may be bad. I have to imagine just the perception of the agency plays a role in that as well. That people running are they lining up for jobs at that agency, and how do you fix the reputation? And that seems like more of a long-term goal than something short-term where that's a place where people may want to work.
First of all, people who choose to work in child welfare have that in their heart. This is something that they choose as a profession. Many people who choose to do that, or even people who choose to be teachers, that's something that they're motivated to do because they believe in it. But yeah, of course, you're going to need to hire people who maybe that's not their first choice, but you still need somebody to work at the agency, and the agency's reputation challenged for decades. But you know what? The reputation of Illinois was challenged for decades, and you saw that before I came into office that the right track, wrong track numbers for the Illinois, when people would poll Illinoisans, 9% thought the state was on the right track at the end of Governor Rauner's term. You just saw the latest poll that showed that 48% of people now think the state is on the right track. That's 4 years. It takes years to improve the reputation of an agency or of an entire state. We have more work to do there too. So DCFS is challenged, but in its reputation. But I think it's got reputation always lags. You've got to perform, and then your reputation becomes improved over time as you perform, and people can see that.
Thanks for the shout out to our poll, by the way. But were you pleased to see that 48% number? I talked with former Governor Jim Edgar about that number, and he thought it'd be way lower than 48%. Were you pleased with that number?
Yeah, I've watched this year after year. The Paul Simon Institute does a poll every year that asks this question, and again, it was 9% when I just before I came into office, shot up to about the low 20s, then in the low 30s, then in the low 40s. Now we're in the high 40s. I think it's a good sign for the state, that the carnival barkers and the people that want to, badmouth the state all the time, including the former governor who's gone, are muted somewhat by the fact that people can see real results that are beneficial for the state, and that's why people are feeling better. Look, I would rather that number was 70%, not 48, but we're on our way. 9%, 48% today. We can get there.
One of the issues that everybody always talks about with Illinois is the way that the state is taxed in that way. This year you had some temporary tax relief that got paid back to taxpayers, and some rebate checks sent out in the past couple of months. Is that the way that Illinois taxpayers should expect relief for the near future? These year by year rebates and maybe tax freezes? Or is it the permanent tax relief that we often hear you talked about on the campaign trail?
I would like to see permanent tax relief, but you can only do that when you balance the budget year after year after year, and I've done that. 4 years in a row, we've balanced the budget. We've now paid off all the state's overdue bills. We don't have any more overdue bills in the state of Illinois. Imagine that. We had $17 billion just a few years ago. Now it's none. And that's great, and we're paying our bills within just a couple of days because of the policies that I put in place that have helped to grow the economy. We now have $1 trillion plus economy for the first time ever in the state of Illinois. We're the 5th state ever to achieve that. That's good for the fiscal health of the state as well. So we need to keep balancing the budget, and when we do that and we run surpluses and we can do that in a consistent fashion, it means we can lower the overall tax rates for the state. And we did that as a temporary measure this year, in part because we could see inflation was rising. We wanted to make sure to get relief right away and not have the debate about what will the budgets look like in the future. But we are already seeing that our budgets are in pretty good shape, that balancing the budget year after year after year and having policies that focus on fiscal responsibility the way Democrats do means that we will be able to provide permanent tax relief in the future.
Is 4 more years enough to get to that point? The state's fiscal health was in such bad shape. Can you do that within another term, or is this, when you say budget after budget after budget, balanced budget after budget after budget, how many more? I don't expect an exact number, but is 4 more years enough?
I think so. Now, of course, you have to see, you don't know from year to year if you're going to see a recession, if you're going to see a boom in economic activity, and all of that affects whether the state can afford to do things. But one thing that's important to recognize is that we're managing for the challenge of a slowdown, for example, by putting money, as I have, into the rainy day fund. I put $1 billion into the rainy day fund. That's never been at $1 billion. It was $60 million for some period of time. Then it got down to $60,000 under Bruce Rauner, and I brought it up to $1 billion. I think we should keep putting money into the rainy day fund. We really ought to get up to about 5% of the whole budget in the rainy day fund, which is about $2.3 billion. We're at $1 billion now, but we came from almost zero. So you've got to manage for that. You've got to manage for balancing the budget every year and running a surplus. And once again, when you look at that surplus, you got to say, can we ratchet down some of the broader taxes that we charge in the state of Illinois? I would like to do that, but we also have to fund schools. We also have to make sure that we're providing mental health and substance abuse treatment in the state, human services, and all the other things that are necessary. Bruce Rauner left us in a huge hole, and we've really built it back up, and I'm very pleased about where we are, but now we're in a position where we can really think about tax cuts in the future.
Over the summer, we obviously had the repeal of Roe v. Wade, and that changed a lot of the dynamics for state politics when it came to this. Obviously, you've made abortion access a cornerstone of your campaign, and it's become a cornerstone of the campaign trail now. But we're coming up on veto session. What is there movement to make on some of these policies you've talked about during the summer, or is that for in the spring when we see potential access increases or things you've spoken about this summer?
Well, the General Assembly has been meeting in working groups to make sure that the legislation is lined up, the kinds of things that we need to get done. For example, expanding capacity in the state so that we can provide the abortion services, reproductive rights that people demand in the state of Illinois for women in the state and people who come from out of state. How can we provide those services for them? There literally are tens of thousands of people pouring over the border because every one of the states surrounding us has essentially outlawed abortion and criminalized it. My opponent, Darren Bailey, as you know, would like to criminalize it and would like to put doctors in jail and thinks it's okay to force a 13-year-old rape victim to give birth. I think that's just wrong. And so, yes, I'm a reproductive rights advocate. I stand up for women's rights. I've been doing that my whole life. I don't change my position. Darren Bailey seems to be running around trying to say, yeah, he's anti-abortion, but hey, he can't really do anything about that. That's just not true. He has tried and will continue to try to take away women's rights in this state, and I'm not going to let him.
I wonder about that. That's been his stance over the past few weeks now, a couple months when it comes to abortion, that I wouldn't be able to change it if I could because of Democratic majorities. As somebody who's wielded the power of the governor's office, for a governor to say, I can't do anything about that, do you buy that at all?
Well, I know what his intentions are. We all do. He's been saying it for years. Even before he ran for and became a member of the General Assembly, he's been anti-choice. He's been against a woman's right to reproductive health. And so he's not changed. He's just saying something in the last few weeks of a campaign, hoping that people, the majority of the people in the state who are pro-choice, will maybe be fooled somehow into voting for him. The reality is he's going to be terrible for women's rights broadly. He runs a school where they actually teach kids that women are inferior to men. And he's been saying that he's anti-choice for years, so I think we should believe him.
When you, at a lot of your campaign events, you've talked about what's at stake in this November election, and Darren Bailey will say that the future of Illinois is at stake in this election. What else do you believe is at stake when we're talking about not just the Illinois governor's election, but these statewide races that you're also playing a big part in?
Yeah, well, let's start with, what kind of a state do we want to have? Do we want to have a fiscally responsible state that has balanced budgets, that's providing tax relief, or do we want to do what Darren Bailey wants to do, which is throw it all into disarray with a kind of a Bruce Rauner budgeting method? He calls it zero-based budgeting, but that will lead to Bruce Rauner budgeting, where you got no budget, and we might go for years without a budget under Darren Bailey. You've got to have responsible management of state government. Darren Bailey's never managed anything more than about 15 people in his life. I used to manage a business that had 10,000 people working for it. I've been a businessman for many years. I understand how to manage. And the truth is that what's at stake here is, what kind of a state do we want to have? Do we want to have a state that stands up for women's rights? Do we want to have a state that's actually trying to raise workers' wages? That's good for working families. We raise their wages. Darren Bailey wants to get rid of the state minimum wage entirely. That's not good for people or working families. He opposes workers' rights. He's, generally speaking, he doesn't understand how to grow the economy of the state. I do. I've been doing it. Again, we've got $1 trillion economy now, and that's even having gone through COVID, which has been the most horrific, deadly global pandemic that we've seen in 100 years. And managed, nevertheless, to attract $13 billion of investment into data centers, bring electric vehicle manufacturers and suppliers to the state of Illinois with tax incentives. Oh, by the way, Darren Bailey voted against those tax incentives. And we've created more small businesses during my term than under any governor ever in the history of the state. And that's where most of the jobs really get created, by new and small businesses.
Even when you say all of that, Darren Bailey is still popular in downstate Illinois. Downstate Illinois has been becoming more and more Republican over the years, and our polls now have been showing growing support for him over the past couple of months alone. I wonder, is that a concern for Democrats when you talk about the way that the state is becoming even more polarized between the Democrats in Chicago and the suburbs compared to downstate, where we're seeing a lot more of that support for these candidates like Darren Bailey and for Donald Trump and those kinds of candidates?
Well, Darren Bailey wants to divide the state. He really believes in kind of promoting a toxic culture of let's throw Chicago out of the state of Illinois. He proposed that. Call Chicago a hellhole. And that's frankly, if you want to bring unity to the state, that is terrible rhetoric. And he believes it. He believes it. Now he says, oh, well, no, I didn't really mean it, and I'm changing my position. That's what he says now. But the reality is that's what he says literally while he's running. The truth is that he has always been against the northern part of the state. He's somebody who only believes in his community. I don't know why people who live in his area would vote for him. I mean, he voted to raise property taxes 81%. He served on the school board there. Now he wants to cut state funding for education, which will also raise property taxes across the state of Illinois to fund schools. I'm trying to reduce property taxes by making sure the state provides funding for education and not local property taxes. So look, I believe that we are one Illinois, that no matter where the governor lives, the governor needs to fight for all parts of Illinois, and I've been doing that. Look at the infrastructure bill I put in place. Look at the jobs that I've created in places like Walker's Bluff, which is going to open soon again because of policies of mine. Look at the Cairo Port project, which we're going to open up in the next couple of years, and we put money there. Investing in Southern Illinois University, all of our directional universities, lifting them up. Darren Bailey wants to take us back to the old Bruce Rauner days and frankly bankrupt the state, and it's bad for Illinoisans.
You said you don't know why anybody in his area would vote for him, but they are going to vote for him. He has support in those areas of the state. How is that a problem in messaging for the Democratic Party? How do you get a foothold in those areas even if you try to list all of these things off, they say, no, this is our guy?
You run people for public office in every area of the state. Democrats shouldn't retreat from anywhere. We ought to be running candidates in Southern Illinois, Central Illinois, Western and Northwestern Illinois. And that's how you build a party. By the way, you got to invest as a party into those areas of the state, and we're doing that this year. But yeah, it's a challenging environment. I think we've seen polarization across the country, but it shouldn't happen in the state of Illinois. I mean, we're the land of Lincoln, who, by the way, would be a Democrat these days if he were alive. But we're the home state of Barack Obama. We're a state, I think, that believes in unity, in bringing people together, and not in division and a toxic culture.
So you said that the Democrats should not retreat from those areas. You said the party is obviously investing in some of those races, but do you feel like there has been a retreat of Democratic voices in part of these states?
I do.
Part of the state.
I do. I think that under the previous chairman of the Democratic Party of Illinois, that there was a kind of belief that we're not going to win in these parts of the state, let's not bother. That's wrong. We should be running candidates and supporting the Democratic parties in counties all across the state of Illinois. And I've encouraged that, and we've done that through the Democratic Party of Illinois now. But it takes years to see results in that. The Republicans have done terribly in, for example, the suburban Cook County and the Collar counties, and in the counties surrounding the Collar counties too, because frankly, they've also retreated and gone to Southern Illinois, Central Illinois, and focused on that. Look, they're a super minority party. We are running candidates this year all across the state, and I think we're going to see great results on November 8th.
All right, I will finish up with one last question. In the tradition of our debates, the past two debates we've had, this one's a little bit more lighthearted. I've heard your Halloween costume's under lock and key. Can you give me a hint? Can you tell me what it is this year?
I will only tell you, but apparently I'm also telling your audience.
This airs on Sunday, so
Yeah.
there's still your trick-or-treating at the mansion's going to be done. So
Yeah.
I don't know if the outfit's going to be worn, but...
So my wife and I have sort of coordinated our costumes as we have in previous years. Maybe you've seen the Star Wars outfits that we wore together and so on. This year she is going as Wonder Woman, and I am going as Clark Kent. And so we're looking forward to welcoming kids and their families at the governor's mansion later today. It's a beautiful day out here in Springfield, so I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
So Clark Kent, you're not going to be rocking a cape. You're going to be in the journalist outfit?
Yeah, I promise you I won't be wearing tights.
Okay. All right. But the journalist outfit, I hear you're going as a reporter. That's what I hear.
Well, there you go. Now you know a little bit more.
All right.
Clark Kent was, in fact, a reporter.
There you go. Well, Governor, thank you so much for taking the time.
Great to spend time with you, Cole.